It's a new day and opportunity is in the air. This is Philip with Soul Insights, and you are tuned into Good Morning Market, where small businesses are empowered to lead their market with the latest in market news, insights, and strategy. In today's episode, we're going to talk big picture. We're in the home stretch of 2021. There's a lot going on in Washington, D.C. with budget fights. There's a lot of talk right now about inflation. We have the latest unemployment numbers. We're entering this home stretch of 2021, and small and mid-sized businesses need to know what's going on. We need to see what's going on in the big picture, what's coming down the pipe, and just as importantly, how can we respond? So that's going to be the topic of today's episode. But first, let's go to the market roundup. So from ADP, National Employment Report came out on October 6th. Private sector employment increased by 568,000 jobs in the month of September. Also from CNBC, we're experiencing a near 7-year high in oil prices, which are stoking inflation concerns. Also from CNBC, President Biden concedes that the $3.5 trillion budget bill will need to be smaller. From CNBC, quote, President Joe Biden has conceded the final version of a $3.5 trillion package of social and environmental initiatives with only Democratic support will have to be considerably smaller. In virtual meetings with House Democrats this week, Biden says he reluctantly sees a price tag between $1.9 trillion and $2.3 trillion, a Democrat familiar with Sessions said Tuesday. Senator Joe Manchin, a high-profile Democratic holdout, wants a bill closer to $1.5 trillion. For passage, Democrats need every vote in the 50-50 Senate and all but 3 in the House, end quote. And finally, from Market Roundup, Georgia was named the top state for doing business from area development for the 8th year in a row. And that's your Market Roundup. So before we get into today's topic, I'm really excited to talk about, some economics. I think that all this stuff is not only fascinating, but very important and impacts us very much directly in terms of where we're headed in this marketplace. But first, I wanted to take a moment to share with y'all why Good Morning Market was created, why Good Morning Market exists, the mission of this program. And it has to do with bringing the right kind of information to small and mid-sized business leaders. We have so much that we're scrambling, it's part of the fun part of the rat race of being a small business leader. I have a lot of things that keep us occupied even within our own 4 walls. But then there are these things happening out in the economy, happening out in the market, happening with consumers. And there's a lot of data and news and different noise that comes our way. And it's very difficult to process through that on what we need to really be paying attention to. We don't have time, not all of us, to be full-time business operators and be market analysts to be able to know how we navigate and which roads and which turns we take with our business. To that point, the National Federation of Independent Businesses did a large study in 2020, a survey of leaders asking them, hey, what are your biggest challenges that you face? And of course, a lot of the usual culprits came up, but surprisingly, 2 of the top challenges listed by small business leaders: uncertainty over economic conditions and keeping up with business developments and market changes. So that's what this program is going to do. This program is going to bring the news and insights and research that you need to know about your economy at large, your target market, and your type of consumer, your type of customer profile. And then not just reporting that news, not just reporting those insights and those trends, but then talking about strategy. Well, how can we avoid the threats or mitigate the threats in the market? And then how can we capitalize on opportunities that these situations also present? So that's in general what the mission of this program is going to be. I'm excited to learn from you and us learn together and, us help each other out as a small and mid-sized business community to compete with the biggest, titans of the industry, to reach out and to add value to our customers in a unique way, and to be able to know what's going on efficiently, so we can then take quick action and be flexible, wise business leaders. So now let's get into today's topic. there's a lot of going on right now in the economy. We have a very high-profile debate within the House and the Senate on trillions of dollars in new spending. That there's going to be a very aggressive, high-profile legislative session all the way through the end of this year, and I think that's when the majority of a lot of the activity in terms of new spending and budget bills are going to really come to the front before things quiet down more likely in 2022. We're talking about inflation. The Federal Reserve has been talking for quite some time about this inflation being transitory. Well, here we are, and some of the tune is starting to change. So the question is what's going on right now and what can we do about it? We're going to cover all of that. But first, I actually wanted to talk about the growth, believe it or not. After the COVID, health crisis came the COVID recession with all the lockdowns. And so we had this artificial inflation that was very sudden and very hard hitting. But the thought was amongst analysts, as we are coming out the other side of that, as we got, adjusted to it, as we started to get closer to herd immunity with the vaccines and people started to go back to work, is that the economy would have as vigorous and as sudden a bounce back as we did, on the flip side with how sudden and aggressive the recession was. And I'm not talking about the V-shaped curve or whatnot, but at the beginning of the year, a lot of economists and analysts were saying, hey, maybe a slower kind of growth rate in the first half of 2021, but as vaccine adoption starts to really take hold, we should have a very, very strong year in terms of GDP growth, and then we'll start to see more of that windfall in the following years. Well, one thing that's interesting, and no one really talks about it, is with all of this budget talk and with these federal spending bills and budgets, there's always going to be financial projections in terms of what Washington is projecting in terms of financial growth, what kind of growth it assumes, because you have to have tax revenue and you need to have some economic forecast to pay for this kind of stuff. So the Biden administration, if you look at their budgets in terms of what their assumed or presumed GDP growth is going to be for the next several years, a lot of their presumptions are based off of a 2% GDP annual growth. Now, that's not for this year and next year, but it's in general, if you look at their long-term kind of forecasts, the average growth rate, they're going to think for the next, 4, 8, 10 years, a lot of it's based on a 2% GDP number. That's very, very slow growth. I know I'm getting way out in terms of the future, but this is just something to give us some context for what's happening now in 2021. What decisions are we making now, which are going to affect us for years to come? They're talking about a 2% GDP growth. That's kind of like our slow recovery following the Great Recession of 2007, 2008. We experienced that kind of 1% to 2% crawling growth for years and years and years. And that doesn't keep up with inflation during normal healthy cycles of inflation, much less the kind of inflation statistic which we're talking about now. So then that takes me to another article which caught my eye, and it was talking about, what analysts and economists are now changing their tune a bit in terms of projected GDP growth. So this comes to us from an economist and forecaster named Patrick Duffy, published an article on October 3rd in LinkedIn titled "A Softening Economy and Persistent Inflation Prompt a Revised Federal Reserve Forecast." I'm going to read you a couple excerpts from there. The first one's about growth. Okay, so we're supposed to have this huge GDP year, and we should expect that. Here's what the Federal Reserve is saying now. Quote, "The combination of higher prices and supply bottlenecks also prompted the group to reduce its estimate of GDP growth downwards to 5.9% for 2021. Still a sharp jump from previous years, but a bit lower than its more robust forecast of 7% in June. However, that delayed growth also meant an increase in estimated GDP growth for 2022 of 3.8%, up from 3.3% in June," close quote. So what this, the Federal Reserve was saying, and rightly so, is okay, 7% growth. That's what we were thinking earlier in the summer. And that's not a crazy growth number. In the 80s, we had a year where we hit 7% GDP growth. That's not far-fetched. That was not an unrealistic scenario. But here we are in October, and we're still dealing with higher prices, supply bottlenecks. We have some concern amongst consumers. We have concern amongst business owners, that the supply chain is not fixing itself out, inflation. So now the Fed is saying in February, we're going to have to revise our GDP growth expectations down by more than a full point. Now we're going to be talking under 6% annual growth. That is disappointing, although they say once again, because of the slowness of recovery in supply chain, we will get some of the kind of delayed gratification more towards 2022, but we're going to lose some of that for 2021. So that's just, things for us to think about is, we're looking at the holiday season. We're looking to have a strong finish in Q4. Q4s are generally pretty strong in terms of growth. But now, the Federal Reserve is saying we're going to have to kick the can of some of that growth over to 2022 because supply chain is just still not catching up. I mean, I don't know if, you are like me, we're being told it's time to shop for Christmas now in October. You wait too long, when you would normally shop for Christmas, you ain't going to see it because the supply chain's just still a wreck. So let's talk about supply chain issues. I mean, that's a big conversation on everybody's mind in the business community. So another quote from that article about supply, quote, in July, the number of job openings rose to nearly 11 million or 2.2 million more than the official number of 8.7 million unemployed persons that month. While raising pay will help to fill some of those positions, others may be replaced by technology, allowing companies to make do with fewer workers, end quote. So I know that there's the global supply chain logistics part of the conversation. I don't really want to talk about that, nor am I really in a position to talk about that. I want to talk mostly about labor and staffing, which I know is a really fourth right in the front and center concern for small and mid-sized business leaders is staffing. And we were talking for months and months and months about the additional federal unemployment compensation and why that was keeping people at home. Well, as of now, a lot of that stuff should be gone. Georgia, for example, exempted itself from that program months and months ago. The federal deadlines on all those extra benefits, should have passed. And we're still dealing with staffing issues. Once again, from that quote, you're looking at 2.2 million more job openings than there are in terms of total people unemployed. So what's going on? What's going on right now? What's the issue? And I think that, this is what's frustrating for people is that, we're a long ways removed from the beginning of this pandemic, from the 14 days of slow the spread, and we still just have way more openings than we do people to fill them. The NFIB put out a report recently where they said that, a majority or a large percentage of business leaders are not able to fill their positions in the same period. They can't find the people. And so, you look at the unemployment numbers. So what's unemployment nationally? The recent numbers for September just got reported. Unemployment nationally in the month of September was 4.8%. Okay, you're thinking, okay, that's pretty good, right? 4.8%. That's comparable, by the way, for looking pre-pandemic to early 2016. Okay. Early 2016 is the last time we saw 4.8% unemployment. And for some more context, at the worst part of this pandemic in April, we were looking at almost 15% national unemployment. Now we're all the way down to 4.8%. Now on the flip side, and the best of this, before the pandemic, at February of 2020, right before all this went down, we were at 3.5. So we're definitely not to the best of pre-pandemic levels. We're kind of where we were at the beginning of 2016. But, on the whole, that's not, terrible. You would think that we wouldn't have such a dire situation with staffing, based off of that number. And by the way, the last numbers I have from the Georgia Department of Labor, for example, the coastal area, 3.1%, which is, even better than the current national numbers. But something I think gets lost in the shuffle when we're talking about, workforce is how many people are working, period. Because the thing with unemployment is it tracks people who are in the workforce, but are just currently unemployed and are supposedly seeking employment. Well, here's one other thing we're going to need to keep an eye on, and we need to keep into context when we look at what's realistically an option for us small business leaders, is we need to think about, with the supply chain issue, you're not being able to produce enough product to meet this red hot demand in the economy. Well, how many people are actually working, period? So if you look at how many people are in the labor force, right before the pandemic started, we were at 63.5% of Americans were working. Eligible Americans who could work were working, and this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the US BLS. Then things dipped almost below 60% at the worst part of this pandemic. Now, though, we've only recovered to about 60, as of September, about 61.5% of people who could work who are working. Really, we've been on a downward spiral. If you look over the past 20 years, back around the September 2001, we were at almost 67% of Americans who could work were working. But then once the Great Recession hit, we've been on this downward slope. We never really recovered, and then we took a huge hit during the pandemic, of course, and we've not really recovered in terms of total people working. What could that be? Just a guess is, we've talked about this for years and years in terms of our workforce population. A lot of our workforce population are baby boomers, older people, and they had been retiring, and there was this conversation about how do we replace that manpower, because a lot of the baby boomers are retiring, and that could be another thing. Is you got when this pandemic thing went down, a lot of people said, just forget it, I'm going to retire early, or I'm just not going to work anymore. Maybe it's a combination of early retirements, or just the way we're doling out federal benefits right now, that it's still viable even sans the additional unemployment benefits. So this might be a more long-term issue than we wanted to, which is why we're still here with these supply chain issues, which is why the Federal Reserve is revising its expectations for growth, which is why you see companies talking about having to use technology to just adapt and overcome with the lack of productivity, because we just don't have as many people working. So we are getting, down and down, like we want to in terms of active unemployment, but that's another thing to keep in mind in terms of permanent or significant labor force changes, is there's just people who may not be coming back at all to work. We're at less than 62% of people who can work who are working. So that's why these problems partly persist. So now let's talk about inflation, right? Now let's talk about the whole inflation buzzword that everybody throws around, and it's what's giving consumers trepidation, it's what's worrying business owners, it's what's worrying Wall Street, and this cloud has been over us for quite some time. Just to quickly kind of define terms for everybody. Inflation. What is inflation? A really good, easy definition is inflation is too many dollars following too few products. That makes perfect sense if you look at what's going on right now. Washington, D.C. is printing and printing and printing and printing more money. Washington, D.C. spent, I think that I saw a tweet somewhere that, Washington has spent like, $9 trillion on fighting COVID. I mean, we were working with $4 trillion budgets pre-pandemic, and that was historically high spending. We doubled that, last year, and you're looking at the same thing kind of this year. And then you look at all the benefits that we're handing out to pretty much everybody from everywhere in any situation. And then you look at that coupled with not as many people working, issues with producing product, issues with energy, issues with all these things. So we're not putting out as much product, but people have more money than ever because of monetary policy. And so therefore you get inflation. Back in August, right? Consumer price index, which is the most prevalent way to track inflation. CPI back in April, historic news. It was 4%. That was like the largest, number since like the early 80s. And everybody was like, whoa. The Federal Reserve said, hey, this is transitory. Everybody calm down. Supply chain's catching up. We're getting out of this pandemic situation. People are going back to work. People are getting vaccinated. Everybody calm down. It's transitory. The supply chain is going to take a while to catch up. Here we are in October. Still the same situation. The CPI has been over 5% the past several months, including in August, it was 5.3%. So what does that mean? Just once again, that's how much the cost of products, the prices consumer pay year over year, 5% higher. When once again, the ideal inflation, because economists like a little bit of inflation. They like a little bit of that inflation over time. They want to run 2%. That's their sweet target number. We're dealing with more than double that for month after month after month, and we're in Q4 of 2021. So that's why you see Wall Street worried. That's why you see Main Street worried. That's why you see new surveys, even though consumers are saying they're going to spend a lot. So consumers are saying that their spending levels are back, but you see consumers more worried about the economy because we continue to have this inflation thing. You're seeing it at the gas pump. You're seeing it at the grocery store. You're seeing it everywhere. And moreover, it seems like the problem's going to be here for a while. The Fed, and I saw in a recent article that the Fed might not start to raise interest rates to combat inflation until middle 2022. I don't know all the, I can't, explain the minutia of the economics on this. I'm not an economist. But the main way to combat inflation is by raising interest rates. Okay. That's the main way to combat inflation. The Fed policy, they're still, buying up bonds, flushing everybody with cash, printing. We're raising the debt ceiling. The printing of money and the spending is still super, super high. The main way to combat that is to raise interest rates, and we might not see that until middle 2022. So I've seen a lot of analysts talking lately that this inflation thing is here to stay. So we're going to have to make plans as small and mid-sized business leaders on how we're going to respond, how we're going to be prepared for this, because our customers' dollar is not going to stretch as far as it used to. Okay, how far does each dollar get you in terms of spending power? Less and less this year, and that's going to continue. It looks like through the middle part of next year, based on the path we are. And I'm slightly concerned, not slightly, significantly concerned that this problem will only get worse. One of the main two most prominent economists in modern history of the 20th century, guy named Milton Friedman, he said that inflation is not a mystery. We know exactly where inflation comes from. It comes from government spending and monetary policy. How much money are you printing, and how much money is the government spending? It's related to that, and it has delayed effects. So we're printing this money, spending at the federal level. We know that all of this printing isn't tied to new levels of productivity. Quite the opposite. We're just not able to produce as much as we usually have. So we're heading to some I don't know if I'd say unprecedented waters, because we went through some of this stuff in the 70s, but we're heading for some interesting waters, and we're going to have our bank accounts and our strategies and our marketing programs set and ready to go, because inflation looks like it's going to be here to stay. The supply chain is going to take a while to catch up, and it looks like our growth numbers, although we should get some additional growth in next year, the growth is going to be underwhelming this year. That's what all signs point to. So now that I've sufficiently got everybody, down in the dumps about the present situation, well, where are the opportunities? Where's the threats, and what can we do about it? Here's some thoughts for y'all just to consider as we all are processing this and thinking about what our strategies need to be moving forward. Number one, obviously watch your debt levels, right? So we don't know when the economy is more uncertain, there's more volatility. You want to not be debt leveraged, right? And you got to protect cash flow for two reasons, not only for liabilities, but also on the other hand, when the economy is a little bit harder to predict, we want to know where the opportunities are in the marketplace, and we want to be extra agile so we can pivot to where the opportunities are as things are dynamically moving, and the things and consumers and habits change more rapidly, right? So we need to have the cash flow so we can move within marketing, we can move within production, we can move within our human resources to where the opportunities are. The more cash flow we have on hand, the less debt leverage we are, the better we're going to be. Then we can be more agile. If you're stuck in a rut because you're too leveraged, then that's going to be where, as we deal with this volatility and the supply chain complications over the next 12 months, that's when you're hamstrung and you can't move to where the market is going. Okay, number two, it's been called the Great Resignation, I've heard. I think it's a pretty apt term in terms of the craziness within the labor force. People who are going to work and who are wanting to work, who are at a job and maybe you want to switch a job, we have more options than ever. There's just, innumerable options, it would seem. And so, some small businesses are like, well, I'll just throw some money at them to get recruitment up. But it's not just recruitment that we need to tackle as small and mid-sized businesses. We also have to attack the retention. we have to attack the retention part of it too. And employees have so many options, So I know traditionally this has been a weak point compared to big businesses, but it's really going to become a weak point now. And we have to adapt better strategies. I know this isn't even necessarily a marketing conversation, which is technically my forte, but it all ties into it, right? If you don't have the people, then you can't execute a marketing strategy. So how can we better tackle recruitment and retention, because there's a fight over talent right now. The labor economics in this country is crazy because of the Great Resignation, because of people leaving the workforce permanently, because of fighting with, all these other security programs at the federal level for benefits. Getting the right people and keeping the right people so you can have the talent to grow your company. Imperative. Here's the other thing. Okay, now we're going to get more into your actual marketing part of your strategy as we get into these, these muddy waters. Is you got to look at your product and your service lines. Because we're going to have more difficulty getting the product, more difficulty getting the supplies, more difficulty with the stuff that's out of our direct control with our supply lines, getting what we're supposed to be offering to our customers. So you got to take another look at, what can you get your hands on? What's the most readily available? What are your lead times? You have to look at that, and we have to relook at our, what product lines and service lines are the most profitable, what are not as profitable. And you have to refocus that. I like the saying that Jack Welch put together is, if you're not number one or number two in your industry, get out. So we need to look at our high profitability services and offerings, really focus on those, while at the same time you need to have some contingencies, because if you got your best seller out there, but you can't get stock of it because of supply chain, you can't have all your eggs in one basket. You got to have some kind of contingency where you can be adaptable and flexible, and you're not kind of completely dependent on the supply chain's ability to get you XYZ, whatever, in a timely fashion, because that might not be the case, right? I think that we're going to, we're so used to in the recent years on this on-demand, everything's where I want it within 1 or 2 days. We're not dealing with that right now. And it looks like I've heard from some that it could be 18 more months before the supply chain is really back to quote unquote normal. So that means we as companies have to look at our product and our service lines. What are the biggest money makers, and how can we refocus where we're invested in terms of our offerings without becoming too dependent on the normal availability of said product or service. Okay. So the fourth point I'll make. Okay. So we talked about, cash flow, debt leverage. We talked about better recruitment and retention strategies for workforce. We talked about number 3, product and service streamlining. Number 4 is my heart. It's looking at your best fit customer segments. Too often in small and mid-sized businesses, try to be everything to everybody. You pick a little geographical part of the map and say, everybody in this area is my customer. Not working then. It's definitely not going to work now, and it definitely won't work in the future. Is we have to be more segmented. We have to be more niche and really focused on our sweet spot, Goldilocks type customer. I will be talking about this more in depth on future episodes. But something we need to be thinking about as we're wrapping up 2021, going into 2022, is who's your best fit customer? Who are your top 2 to 3 segments? How can you be as focused and specialized as them as possible, operating in the niches where there's these gaps that the big brands just won't be able to meet their needs as well as you can? And then how do you stop trying to go for all the other stuff, right? The more focused you can be, the more as your customers' wallets start to get pinched, okay, and they see that their dollars aren't going as far, or they start to get more worried about the economy, they start to reevaluate their spending. You've created this irreplaceable, deep connection, strong value. You're going to be one of the last ones to get cut from the budget, right? Because you've created that tight, highly defensible position and relationship in the market. Okay, so let's go to point number 5 real quick. Over communicate with your customers. I talked about this previously. It's talked about a lot, is when we start to get worried about stuff, we stop with the marketing, we reduce our communication, we reduce our efforts, we reduce our campaigns, not only with getting new customers. Maybe you have an issue getting new customers right now because of staffing issues. I understand that, but we have to be really invested in over communicating with our existing customers, showing them love, communicating with them, empathizing with them on what they're going through, setting proper expectations, under promising and over delivering, even with all this, the challenges that you have. People can be patient and forgiving, but when you aren't able to offer them the conveniences they become accustomed to, and then you don't communicate well, and then you stop talking to them and reaching out to them with value and empathy and appreciation, that's when you get yourself into trouble. So on our marketing programs, do we need to be focused on going after the right segments and in getting in that new business? Absolutely. At the same time, we need to be focused on our customer retention strategy and how we can continue to love on them to make that relationship as sticky as possible as things go in, a direction nationally that we might not be able to control, right? And then the final point is, of course, keep good data, right? Not just on profit margins, not just on cash on hand. It's the kind of stuff within your marketing program as you're trying to get more focused and strategic during, these times, is how much are you spending to acquire new customers? On average, how much value are you deriving and able to build in the relationship with an average customer over the lifetime of that relationship? That's the kind of stuff you can know. So you can know how much budget you can allocate to getting each new customer, how efficient you are at doing your job to onboard new customers. So you can continue to grow despite the inflation, despite the supply chain complications, despite the stuff that's going on in Washington, D.C. So this is stuff that's, it's going to be in front of us. I think that if things are going to be kind of in this atmosphere, I would say at least through the latter part of next year, I think the next 12 months, we continue to have issues with supply chain. We continue to have issues with inflation. We continue to have issues with workforce manpower. And I think that it will start to, as this goes on longer, you'll start to have certain people get a little bit more worried, dial back spending, and these, we'll have to be getting ahead of this now in 2021 in order to win over the next, 12 months. So that's what I'll leave y'all with now. A lot of stuff to keep track of. I will keep you informed as best as possible. You can obviously keep track through the podcast, through YouTube, through the Good Morning Market newsletter, which you can find at soulinsights.com. But for now, I think that covers it. By the way, we are going to be talking in the next episode with Victoria Baylor, who is a personal brand expert. She talks a lot about mindset, clarity, and we're going to talk to her about how we as business leaders can establish our personal brand with our target audience to build that connection and to establish that reputation. So really looking forward to that, that conversation. I think she's going to bring some great insights to us. And know that, if you enjoy this episode, if you have feedback, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a rating or review wherever you get your podcast or your episodes. Please tell your friends and colleagues about Good Morning Market and let them know, that they can subscribe and join the community. And if you have any questions or perhaps you know someone who would be good for an interview, please reach out to me at info@soulinsights.com. That's info@SOLINSIGHTS.com. Well, everybody have a great day. Many blessings to you. This is Philip with Good Morning Market.